I'll speak up. Everyone can hear me fairly clearly. So when I walked into the room, it reminded me of law school. I always sat in the back row. I see you back there. The reason for that, I'm sure I ever got the reading completely done. But it gave me the willies a little bit starting off. It's great to be here. This is such a fantastic school. And I toiled in the vineyard on Capitol Hill for many, many years. Public policy. It's really one of the crown jewel institutions for public policy in the world. So I'm thrilled to have an exchange with you and my friend here. On the introduction side, thank you. So I got started just a couple miles that way, I think, at Brigham and Women's Hospital. That's where I was born. I love the Bay State. Spent tons of time here down on the South. Marion. Does anyone know Marion, Massachusetts?
Yep.
Great place.
Beautiful.
Spent all my summers there. And then I got an education, actually, I went to Cambridge at Boston for high school. And then made my way to UC. And to do all these different things. And I work for TSMC right now. After 16, 17 years on the Hill, with Senator Feinstein and Senator Duckroth from Virginia. So TSMC is a what? Semiconductor foundry, right? Semiconductor company, the terrific company. We make bleeding edge chips, advanced silicon. TSMC is in this room. I would venture to say, who has a handset? Who has a smartphone on them today? Raise your hand. That particular phone is going to have a TSMC chip in it, an applications processor. It's going to have a PMIC, going to have an image sensor. TSMC is everywhere, but it's not a very well-known company. We focus on fabricating silicon in Taiwan. We do it in the US. We're expanding our global footprint. We're about 70,000 people worldwide. We make 12,000 different products. 70% of our business is in the United States. Last year, 2022, we came in at about 76 billion, 35% up year over year. It's a terrific company. The leadership is very humble. We're 70,000 engineers mostly, and we're globalizing our footprint step by step. Easiest process, but we are definitely coming on shore in the United States, in Phoenix, and you might have read about that in recent months. And we can talk about that as Leslie Stahl. I don't know who she's going to be. I don't know what identity is going to be questions, but there'll be a conversation. The most important thing is that hopefully it's a good learning opportunity for you to understand the most critical business, technology business in the world, my perspective. Nothing works unless the hardware works. It enables everything up top. TSMC is crucial in that regard as a foundry. I see my friend Noah Truitt from Harvard Business School doing a case study on TSMC. And the business model of TSMC as a foundry is different than a traditional IDM, an integrated device manufacturer, which designs chips and then makes them. We just make the digital engine. That's what we specialize in, particularly advanced silicon in terms of the qualities of that chip, which involve gigahertz speed, involves transistor density, it involves thermal power management, it involves overall functionality and back-end quality. And the company has had a great run for almost 35, 40 years, specializing and segmenting in that one thing. It's not easy. Not easy. And we maintain an enormous amount of humility trying to go forward, navigating in the public policy world. And that's what she and I we'll talk about lots of different topics. We're new to that part. And so thank you for having me. This is really a real opportunity coming back to Massachusetts. Feels like coming home for me. So with that, turn to the moderator and we'll get going.
So I'll cut to the chase. I think Peter is too modest to say, nobody knows about TSMC. It's probably one of the hottest companies in the world, in my view. And I think thanks to you for making semiconductor so sexy these days. It is one of the topics I would say in Washington D.C. that everybody pays attention to. And so people are starting to learn more about semiconductor and what is it, right? So I think today we want to focus our conversation starting with really, why semiconductor as an industry is so strategically important and how that sector and the leading company TSMC, in terms of its own business priorities, intersect with US national security and economic security. I think that's where probably why everyone is here in the Harvard Kennedy School. That's where the most interesting things are. So let's start with TSMC's $40 billion investment in Arizona. It's to build two fabs, basically, including one of the more advanced. And we saw President Biden visiting Arizona months ago with TSMC founder Morris Chang. Anyone did, I did not bother. So, I think to the extent that you can share, I'm fascinated by TSMC's decision to invest in Arizona. Its communication has been with the US government, right? Because for a lot of people, it didn't seem to make a lot of business sense in terms of cost, in terms of onshoring, given TSMC's past failure trying to onshore in the US. So, tell us sort of the thinking process and decision without revealing confidential information, obviously.
I'll make it explain how we got the Phoenix. Anybody from Arizona? Any of the Southwest? No. Semiconductor country USA, Phoenix, Arizona. There are a lot of semiconductor companies already there. And so one part of the puzzle, about 4 years ago in the fall of 2019, a couple of us went to different parts of the country and we were looking at places for TSMC to potentially come on shore. Because I mentioned that 70% of the business is already here, our customers. You know those names. They are like NVIDIA, they're Qualcomm, they're AMD. Yeah, they designed the chip to your Lisa Su from AMD. You design the chip, but you don't make it. You work with TSMC, build that digital engine. Lisa Su, probably the most gifted CEO in the semiconductor industry. AMD has done tremendously well. Right, that's an interesting point. Lisa Su, Taiwanese American, the person that runs TSMC, obviously Mark Liu, Jensen Huang, runs NVIDIA, Taiwanese American. So Jensen or Lisa, they have intricate designs for what they want their chip to look like, but we build it for them. It's an intertwining. It was TSMC in the mid-80s that created that separate business identity as a foundry to focus and segment on one thing that has made us very, very successful. Now, we needed to come on shore because many of our customers are here and the STEM talent didn't all exist in Taiwan. Taiwan is smaller, and so we've been expanding our global footprint in Japan, the United States. We're thinking about Europe as our business has increased. That hasn't been the easiest transition due to the capital efficiency that we have in Taiwan, but it's been a successful trip. So we went in August of 2019, three, four of us, Jonathan Lee, Tony Chen, myself, a fantastic guy, Edward Cassidy. We went up Interstate 17, which is why I was asking if anybody's from Phoenix, to look at a spot in the desert, 1,200 acres in the hot desert north of Phoenix. And that was a happy home for us for lots of different reasons. In terms of the topography, in terms of the seismic layout, in terms of energy, water, power. The massive inputs to build an advanced wafer fab. And so we bought land for $90 million in December of 2019 at a public auction. In the spring of 2020, we had an announcement with the administration, President Trump at the time, Mike Pompeo, Wilbur Ross, about building a 5 nanometer $12 billion fab, Phoenix, for public information. The problem at that point, May 14th, 2020, was the next day we had to figure out where we were going to get the incentive support and money from the US government. So we made an announcement, but we weren't entirely certain in the public policy area how to get the partnership and financial support from the US government. So that was my problem. That was not an easy thing to solve.
So can we pause here? So it was initially a true business decision in terms of onshoring Arizona. Was that an accurate description or not really? Meaning how much was the Trump administration involved in your decision?
I think it was a mutually positive and collaborative and partnered decision.
Got it.
Given the costs involved, billions and billions and billions, which we knew about, and our need to come onshore, but the US government needed to help us. And the state of Phoenix needed to help us. And the city of the state of Arizona, and the city of Phoenix needed to help us. So this is where public policy officials and corporate officials had to come together as one. The details though were different. Talk a little bit about that from spring of 2020 through till August of 2022. The CHIPS Act worked its way through Congress, and that was not easy.
And so, well, then let's focus on that. So it sounded like it started with the Trump administration, which actually recognized the strategic importance from the national point of view and working with state of Arizona, probably more from the economic interest and job creation.
Absolutely.
And now in terms of incentives, right, that's where TSMC needed help from the US government through the CHIPS Act and all that. So what we're seeing is actually, if I could call it, a heavy-handed US government involvement in this whole process. And some would call it this industrial policy. That current administration, especially, is almost like very proud of its own approach. And how do you see that, given that TSMC is one of the largest companies in the world, and in the past, it's always relied on globalization. I would say we're on the market, make it work. And right now, it seems like there's a lot of government involvement. And are you worried that it may actually affect your innovation, affect your cost structure? And
Answer, no, not worried. Industrial policy, there's a negative connotation to that term and that phrase. Maybe you all study it here. Times are changing. And it's important when you identify a crown jewel industry. And that's computer chips, not potato chips, computer chips, crown jewel industry. It's important to invest and nurture and sustain that type of industry, particularly the fabrication side, the making side, the manufacturing side of chips in the United States. And what the Trump administration recognized, and then what the Biden administration has followed through on, particularly Secretary Raimondo, is that there's a problem. Steve described it as a crisis, but that in this country, there's no advanced manufacturing, leading edge fabrication going on anymore. And that problem has to be solved. And that's what she's been doing. That's what the CHIPS program office is about. There's a first class group of people from Mike Schmidt to JD Rome to Sri Ramaswamy to Ronnie Chatterjee, people like you, they're a little bit older than you, that have your background in education, that are hard at work implementing the CHIPS Act. CHIPS Act got passed in August of 22, all the navigating through Capitol Hill, heroic bipartisan efforts by Senator Cornyn, by Mike McCall, Republicans joining hands with Democrats. It's pretty unusual. It was an unusual test case for the parties coming together. And now we're in an implementation phase where semiconductor manufacturing at a 4.3, 2 nanometer level, it has to occur here. And so we're now in flight, working with the administration to sort out incentives. Lots of different companies can benefit. Final point, not the TSMC, there's Texas Instruments, they're fantastic. They produce a certain type of chip. There's Micron, they're on the memory side. They should be on the receiving end of incentives. Samsung and Intel, if you've heard of them, terrific companies, and a rising tide of semiconductor funding should lift all those boats.
So many follow-up questions. First, you mentioned 2. You mentioned 4, 3, 2 nanometers. 2 is the first time I heard. Because, you know, in Taiwan, right, where TSMC is headquartered, there's a lot of debate about this hollowing out effect. People are concerned that this huge investment of TSMC in the United States may, including relocating a lot of engineers to the United States, may actually hollow out the semiconductor industry in Taiwan. What is your view on that?
Yeah, no hollowing out for Taiwan, no de-Taiwanization. I think there's some Taiwanese over here that was side of the road. Someone had said that. Right there, what's your name?
Taiwanese.
How? What your name is what? You think? And you live in Benton? Where are you from? Taipei? Both of you? Yeah. So, you know, TSMC founded in the mid 1980s, and probably 2 dozen fabs across Taiwan from Kaohsiung to Tainan, that's into. We're getting bigger and we're getting better and we're getting faster, and so expansion overseas is quite natural. For STEM talent purposes, for customer purposes, we can conduct R&D in Taiwan on the leading edge, and then similarly get faster and better abroad. Some people don't know this, but we filed for patents at USPTO, 4,800 patents last year. We file for intellectual property protection in the United States. We'll throw off trade secrets and good ideas when we fabricate in Arizona, but that's not at the expense of Taiwan. Taiwan will continue to thrive. We are incorporated there. We just are growing so rapidly that it does make sense for us to be in other locations around the world. Taiwan has 20, and I were talking about this before, 26 million people. She's a graduate of the famous NTU, National Taiwan University. We hire thousands of those individuals, but we're going to hire from Carnegie Mellon too, and we're going to hire from Caltech and all around the world. And that's, we're becoming a more global multinational corporation, but the home base is still from where you are from Taiwan. I travel there frequently, and so de-Taiwanization, hollowing out of Taiwan, it's not an accurate representation of what's coming.
I do have to ask this question because one of the reasons why CHIPS Act united both parties in Washington and became one of Biden administration's landmark was based on the argument that the U.S. needs to revitalize its own chip capability, especially in the context of competition.
Right.
And now the question, especially, or the concern about too much advanced chip making concentrated in Taiwan, is this fear that should China act on or invade Taiwan, that may be an issue, and it would become the supply chain and, chip making shortage, to the world, etc. And so even Secretary of Commerce, Raimondo, has said that, it's too dangerous to rely on Taiwan. So is that the main reason that the US is so focused on getting TSMC to manufacture and relocate engineers to the United States? Should Taiwan be worried about that?
So, a lot of speculation about danger in Taiwan. Keep calm.
Silicon Shield.
Keep calm. Well, that you see that TSMC subscribed as Silicon Shield, but it needs to be Taiwan. Keep calm. Carry on. I'm not a strategic expert, geosecurity expert. I'm a corporate representative and lawyer. But smooth sailing in Taiwan, I think the peaceful resolution of the Taiwan question will come over time. Emphasis on the word. What Secretary Raimondo has talked about is ensuring U.S. economic security and U.S. national security. And the United States can't do that right now because they don't fabricate on the leading edge. She's talked about this repeatedly. She has an enormous amount of ability and intellectual velocity and has been the driving force of the CHIPS Act. TSMC can solve that problem. Instead of focusing on TSMC, think about the end users that need the fast chips. So is anybody here familiar, we're just showing hands, with a company called OpenAI? Okay, how many is it? OpenAI. So, so they produce what? They produce an app, ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4. It's revolutionary, it's not just evolutionary. That's software, right? Software app. So it's a language training algorithm that's pretty incredible when you read about it. A lot of data input, and it can make decisions and path the bar exam 90% better than anybody else lately. I mean, when you look at what they said in the last couple of weeks. So the software is enabled by hardware, and you need dynamic silicon that has the gigahertz speed, that has the transistor density to run OpenAI, ChatGPT 3 and 4. You think it's okay if that hardware is made overseas somewhere? If you think, is that okay? Raise your hand if you think that's okay. Should some of it be made here? Maybe. Think about autos and Tesla. Anybody been in a Tesla lately? If you've been in a Tesla, raise your hand. So the bill of materials in a Tesla silicon is about $1,500. There's an enormous amount of advanced silicon in a Tesla that has these qualities for what purpose? For autonomous driving purposes, for electrification purposes, for ADAS systems inside the Tesla. Tesla's a very cool car. For those chips that Tesla needs, and GM, for example, do you think it's important for those leading edge chips to be made here in Phoenix, Arizona by TSMC? What would, yes or no? You can, yes, you.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you need it in case you have a blockade on the supply from other places. You need to.
As a reassurance, as an insurance policy, is it a good idea for TSMC to produce to ensure U.S. economic security? Is it useful for those two? Yes.
Also from a business point.
And the final point on national security, ensuring U.S. national security in terms of that silicon fuel, the best chips inside of the cockpit of an F-35 and the avionics system of the most lethal fighter aircraft that the U.S. has. Those fast chips, should they be made here? Just in case for an insurance policy.
Just in case.
Makes sense. And so TSMC can do that. And so that's the point. You don't have to make everything here, but TSMC can be responsive to US government concerns. And that's the process that's underway. And those are kind of use case examples for you to think about. Various companies, they need the hardware. That's what they need inside their system.
I think the reason why, again, offshoring to TSMC is based on this distrust, right? That first, the most advanced chips should be made in the United States, ideally even by American companies. But since TSMC is now the most advanced, so any Taiwanese, we can trust them rather than, let's just be very blunt here, rather than Chinese. And I think that there's a lot of sort of motivation behind this, and we should talk about it, because if you look at what the US is doing now to even establish this alliance, right? So the chip four, that includes South Korea, Japan, in the United States, and asking the Netherlands to also follow a lot of the export, restrictions, etc. It's bringing allied countries and companies based in those allied countries to form this alliance and then actually impose restrictions on chip making in China. Do you think that's actually ultimately going to accomplish what the US government is trying to do, which is making sure that the most advanced chips are made, manufactured by the US in the United States? Or there's another kind of argument saying, well, actually, it'll just accelerate China's to produce advanced chips on its.
So Secretary of State Blinken gave a great speech last spring. Not great, that's not right. Useful speech that lays some of these issues out. And he talked to GW, I think it's April, May last year. Talked about invest the line compete. But invest in the CHIPS Act stuff, right? Which we've been talking about. Invest at home because America, the US does not manufacture advanced silicon anymore. Check. TSMC can help there. Align with allies and partners on essentially export control policy. Big tactics that they have employed in the regulatory space and in the export control area are working. We don't take a position on this at TSMC. We abide by the letter of US law, but what you have seen in the last few years is unilateral regulatory action on export controls and then plurilateral, when she is talking about among allies to constrain China. It has constrained China. It has been successful. The US is very powerful, and you all may have roles in the US government at some point. You're studying public policy. BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security, at the Commerce Department is a pretty darn interesting place to work, because there's an enormous amount of activity ongoing there to exercise US authority and regulation to constrain China on the technology front. So TSMC doesn't have a view about that. We abide by the rule and the letter of all these complex Federal Register notices. There were some big new rules that were issued in October that involve supercomputer chips in China, artificial intelligence-based chips in China, and restrictions. And we follow those rules. Just yesterday, I think when I was coming up on the plane, I was reading about the Chinese ambassador in the Netherlands saying there will be consequences when the Netherlands, Japan, the US plurilaterally collaborating. I think that's confirmation right there that China is feeling it. We sell to China. We view that as a good marketplace for our chips commercially, but we follow rules and regulations everywhere and have to, because we're just a company. Yeah, we're not a think tank. We don't take positions on these issues. We try to sell chips where we can. But the US, final point, the US is powerful and they're exerting that authority. And someday, some of you might be making these decisions at the State Department or the Commerce Department. That's why it's so interesting. You're getting the fantastic training here, potentially to go make contributions at a federal level.
Well, you say TSMC doesn't take a position, obviously, to follow rules and regulations. However, Morris Chang, I know he no longer has a company role, but the founder did comment on this a couple of days ago, said he actually supports the US policy to slow down China's progress. However, he also noted, as a business person, very aware of the power imbalance. He also noted that the friendshoring concept, which you may want to elaborate on that for this group of students, that friendshoring doesn't include Taiwan because, again, the US still views Taiwan as a high risk.
Morris Chang founded TSMC, and he is just an enormous figure in the semiconductor industry. Does anyone know that name? Morris Chang? It's up there with Gordon Moore, Andy Grove, Morris Chang. They're probably Jensen Huang too. I would say that there's 3 or 4 over your type thing. But Morris Chang is certainly one of them. Iconic figure. He founded TSMC. He disrupted the industry by creating this new foundry segment. He's retired now. He's in Taipei.
He's 91 years old.
But he is, he is at this Gordon Moore level and did speak out supportive of U.S. sanctions towards China. That's not the TSMC point of view. And Morris would be fine with me saying that. We're running the company. We sell in the commercial marketplace in China, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, handset players there. And
who's still in countries and how that affected people.
it is not. We are on good terms in Nanjing and Shanghai where we manufacture and then we sell our products across China to the Chinese people. We are careful because we have to abide by US rules, policy edicts, regulations, export control statutes. It is complex. It's complex for me, my job. I'm on the front line. Could be someone like you someday. So it's important for us to sell to commercial marketplaces around the world, particularly since we lead the industry. Now, we don't sell, we can't manufacture the most advanced chips in China. That's been restricted by the US. And we don't sell to military civil fusion entities inside of China either. We sell commercially. It can be difficult sometimes for us to deduce or understand where the chips might go sometimes. We have a robust compliance system inside China, but we're just a company. We're not an entire government. And so we're very careful about doing the best we can, selling to people around the world, in the United States, where most of our business resides, but in Latin America, in Europe, and elsewhere. So his comments were certainly interesting. Now, on the flip side, on the Taiwan as a risk, I'm not sure how well if that's been properly interpreted. The U.S. government is very interested in onshoring of TSMC. We've worked hand in glove for 3-4 years with them about that. Friendshoring, if not onshoring to the U.S., maybe friendshoring TSMC to an allied nation like Japan or Germany. Complex equation here of the CHIPS Act. Because Europe has a CHIPS Act, U.S. has a CHIPS Act, Japanese are doing it, and the governments want to coordinate. You don't want to get out of kilter amongst the aligned countries. And so we're investing, publicly invested in Japan, and we're publicly invested in the United States, and we've been considering the options in Germany. And the governments also are talking to each other. Someday you might be an official doing this talking. And it's important, as much as I know, for them not to be in conflict or duplicate efforts with a whole lot of money on the table. We don't want to make mistakes. Final point on semiconductors. We're so careful, we're so slow, we're so meticulous, because if we make a mistake on our technology node progression or an investment, it costs billions of dollars. And so that's why TSMC don't hear much from them. We keep our head down. We stay incredibly humble, stay customer focused, and try to avoid mistakes because the cost for us is very damaging and enormous if we do that.
So now that the big announcements have been done, I think the hard work has just been done for you in particular. What keeps you up at night? What are some of the major challenges for you for the next few years in terms of this? For
But in DC, you want to make, this has not been partisan. This has been bipartisan now for 3.5 years. And so as we go into an implementation phase with the CHIPS Act, there's a statement of interest that we filed. There's a pre-application process, there's an application process, there's a due diligence process, there's a memorandum of terms as we go through the applying for and receiving the actual grant funding or loan guarantees.
pretty much there.
No, it's not. And might be it's a very, very good candidate for it, but we got a lot of hard work to do. And so that keeps me up at night. Can't make mistakes. We need to be responsive to people that are at the CHIPS program office, Mike Schmidt, Sri Ramaswamy, Ronnie Chatterjee at the White House. These are incredibly capable people. JD Rome is another, and they are implementing a program, and we have to connect the dots and work very, very closely with them. We have a facility where an enormous amount has been invested. President Biden came on December 6th for lots of good signs, but a ton of work to do. The cost structure in Phoenix has not been easy for us. Capital efficiency there is different than Taiwan. And so there's been a learning curve for us. We're a foreign company. And so step by step, so that can keep me up at night. Fingers crossed. We feel like we have taken all the right steps for 3.5 years. This commentary about the threat environment in Taiwan, I think it's grossly overstated, but that's a worry point because there are people that write about it, and we're trying to run a semiconductor business and trying to come on shore and trying to invest in other places. And so, not my view about Taiwan. I think Taiwan, I've been there twice in the last 6 weeks and continue to go there, but thinking about its status and the writing that goes on can be frustrating for us. So those types of issues, I don't try not to lose too much sleep over these things.
Fundamentally, TSMC is a company, so the business model has been working. It's been working the last few decades because, again, say it's got great engineers in Taiwan work really, really hard, 3 shifts, etc. So can you bring that kind of culture to the US and elsewhere and continue that, or it will have to find a new business model to keep TSMC as successful?
Success comes from bending the customer, bowing to the customer, focusing on the customer. You're the customer. You are OpenAI, GPT, Chat 3 or 4, the head of that. We customize your silicon for you. That's the beauty of Foundry. That's the beauty of the segment. Externally, in terms of branding and marketing, we're not, we don't do a whole lot. That's why you probably don't hear as much about us, but we are relentlessly focused on changing up, tweaking, fabricating what you need for your product. NVIDIA is, their GPU is what OpenAI uses, and we make most of NVIDIA's GPUs. Jensen Huang showed up at Morris Chang's doorstep about 20 years ago. NVIDIA did not exist. And Jensen Huang, as iconic and brilliant as he is, he had ideas, but then Morris Chang fulfilled those ideas for him. And so the synergy between the maker and the software designer is been extraordinarily effective for TSMC. But world's going to get more complicated. I mean, all these policies and the regulations upstream to them, they're the tool makers, and then they're people that actually make the software that NVIDIA buys, media, it's called electronic design automation software, that's Synopsys, Cadence, Siemens. The complex ecosystem, and you have to try to manage it in a way that you can keep the business going forward. And certainly we're making tremendous progress in the United States. But over time, the world is challenging. There's inflation, rising interest rates, wars in Ukraine, blocking of Russia and exports to Russia. It's a lot. And that's what you're studying to some degree at a public policy institution like this. And actually, once you get there, whatever level you might work at, it's difficult. And we try to manage it as best we can to serve those customers.
My last question, and then we'll open up for the students, is in your career, you obviously have been a veteran, actually almost most of your life in Washington D.C. career as well. So what gives you the greatest satisfaction, especially now, sitting where you are?
Well, being a public servant is the greatest satisfaction for me. I spent 16 years on Capitol Hill. I would strongly recommend that path. Like a bright-eyed bunch here, and I worked at Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I worked at Senate Intelligence Committee, Senate Finance Committee as well. There's nothing like public service in terms of the feeling of contributing to crucial issues. Yeah, it's a co-equal branch of government. The executive branch always thought they were more important than the legislative branch. Co-equal. And so I was always oversight. I would never work with the other end of the thing. And I played with. Well, I don't know about that, but it's interesting. It's a community of people. Joe Biden was at the Foreign Relations Committee for many years. And his people, some of my friends, they've done very, very well. That's terrific. So that's the most interesting part. But I also didn't hesitate. I was a lawyer by training, but I didn't not encourage you to. I didn't particularly enjoy practicing law, but working at a company, I have found to be very interesting, particularly one. I don't want to criticize other companies, but a long time ago, when I thought semiconductors were interesting, we were talking beforehand, most people were not familiar with the semiconductor business, but I had opportunities to work in tech and other things. But I wanted to work at a company that actually built something that I could touch and feel versus a social media screen. That's just the choices we make. You're going to make it. You'll all make this. And it turned out that now semiconductors, like she's grossly exaggerating how sexy it.
It is in Washington D.C.
I've enjoyed it. I've been doing that for 12, 13 years since I did all these different jobs on Capitol Hill. It's allowed me to stay involved in the public policy process. I don't work for a cigarette company. There are a lot of companies I don't believe in, but I do. And I personally have some conviction about how important it is for this foreign company to come here to create high-tech, high-wage jobs. 5,000 jobs in Phoenix with us, 13,000 supplier jobs, 21,000 construction jobs, $6 billion in personal income that will increase in Phoenix over a 10-year time frame from all those people that get those jobs. I think that's cool. And I've been deeply involved in making sure that the statutory process moves along, the TIPS Act, and now the regulatory process. So I enjoy it, and I would highly recommend it to all of you. You do it at a state level, you do it at a local level. the Phoenix, the woman is the Phoenix mayor, and she's incredible. Kate Gallego. And she's, I think she needs a pen or something like that. Gold. In fact, we hired someone that was her senior policy person, Laura French, who's done a great job. There's so many great public officials across the country. I had worked for Dianne Feinstein as an aide, and she's a trailblazer. And that was a great honor. So I highly recommend what I did, but then you don't have to stay forever. I mean, I didn't, I had to start paying some tuition bills that my wife, it was one of those late night conversations with my wife of like, it's time. So we're very happy, we're happily married.
Thank you. I see many hands. Most with
So there's no mic. So I just project myself. So thank you for your insightful discussion for this 45 minutes. I'm Ken from Japan, currently very interested in the semiconductor field. I'm currently exactly researching on the Chip 4 Alliance right now, and so writing a paper. And so my point is, when I attended the Excellent Semiconductor related event once in HKS 1 month ago, I guess, I remember that you were hosting that once. And so by a visiting fellow from Taiwan, I asked him what Taiwan's hopes were for Japan regarding the Chip 4 Alliance and what he thought of the potential of the newly established semiconductor company Rapidus happening in Japan right now. The fellow replied, unfortunately, with Japan's current technological capabilities, it will not be possible to complete the 2-nanometer target within 5 years. Japan should cooperate with us in the field of product design, for example, not in the semiconductor content itself. So I got so disappointed. It's embarrassing as a Japanese diplomat. Oh, Japan is, Japan's technology is now such kind of underrated. And so what do you expect in terms of Japan's future role in the semiconductor supply chain? Is it true that Rapidus cannot achieve its target 2-nanometer size? And is product designing, you mentioned something about the product designing is, suited for every customers or every manufacturing is also very important. So do you think that the product designing also important as fabricating itself?
Japan is vital across the semiconductor.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
There for Tony. And if you know Tony, big into handset camera, come over here with flashing their handset over here. We're also critical in the car space, like the digital cockpit. And for infotainment purposes, for autonomous level vehicles, big things happening in car space, and right in the middle of all that. So we're building silicon for them there. Is Japan going to? They're huge on the chemical input side too, in terms of wafer supply. Japan is critical globally. If they need to fabricate at 2-nanometer. I don't know the answer to that question. Does the United States? Different. What about Dresden? I think governments have to sort that out. We have a pretty good sense of TSMC. Who needs to manufacture at what we call the technology process node level, which is performance functionality of the chip. But Japan is crucial, and they will be crucial for forever. On in the chip business, I would say.
Got it. Thank you.
You
Well, go ahead.
No, you do the.
Process, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Nisha. I'm from India. I'm here. I'm just curious. It seemed very contrary. On the one hand, you're saying that this Taiwan, this perceived as overstated. But at the same time, it is moving, like you said, that TSMC is moving here, like part of the business for security reasons. So it doesn't add up to me. I mean, unless there were security reasons, they wouldn't move here. And it did not, like you said, that shouldn't US have these things, and US should have these things in the last 30 years. That TSMC has been the monopoly in the chips. Like the need to shift is only now, which seems to suggest something. I'm just trying to get at if
I know, I hear you. You're asking a hard question, but I've been confident with myself in terms of some of they say, look, we're going abroad because we're growing so rapidly and we need to recruit STEM talent all over the world and we need water from all over the world, power sources all from all over the world. And does it help mitigate the geopolitical risk that we don't think necessarily exists right now? Of course it does. So the US officials have testified this way that China does not maintain the capability or the intent to conduct invasion of Taiwan. In the meantime, our business, our customers, and I haven't even named a couple of our largest ones, of our customers want us to fabricate worldwide. And so we're responding to doubt primarily. We mitigate our risk at the same time with the motivation, in part too, because Taiwan is small. I mentioned Wenchi going to NTU, but they can only produce so many engineering graduates, and we are getting bigger and bigger. So our footprint naturally grows around the world, maybe even in India. India has been treated more as research and design. They're trying to get into front end, we call it front end manufacturing. That's an interesting journey for them, not easy. But so that's how I would respond. There's at multiple levels, there are reasons for us to diversify and expand our global footprint.
Yes.
Stuart, first year, interested in the process of choosing Phoenix. So now, from that, is the inputs from state, local, government, and the sort of loan guarantee, grant funding, is it what's that's the wider net of things that you're looking for, but for skill talent, but also for infrastructure investment. So what's absolute investment challenging capital efficiencies? Can you just speak a little bit about that?
So I think I said that Phoenix is Semiconductor Country USA. There are 65, 70 companies there already. And so would it make sense to build a greenfield fab in Florida? What do you think? Yeah. Right. Right. Well, you think the way we think. So we look at the factors. We looked at a couple locations where the.
What are the other locations?
I don't know.
Ohio.
So, one factor was, we have a lot of PhD and double E and MS double E. And we looked at migration pattern. If you had to choose between Dubuque, Iowa and Phoenix right now, where would you, let's say you were a double E, does the department have an engineering school?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Would you rather pack your bags in Cambridge and go to Dubuque? Or would you rather go to Phoenix? Like just from a personal Phoenix, right? And so we take that into consideration. Their power situation is tremendous. Well, the piece of land we have, seismically, we don't like disturbances. We like perfect temperatures. We don't like snow. We put 146 billion transistors on the MI 300 chip for AMD, which just got announced. That's a 5 nanometer chip. It's just like a Clydesdale of a chip, load of a chip. But we don't like any disruption, natural environment disruptions. We like isolation, we like elbow room. So when you start looking at various places, if it snows a lot, probably don't like that, right? We don't like wafer fabrication is very sensitive to natural resources. And then the one criticism we've received on the water end is, well, Phoenix, there's some water deficits. We'll end up recycling all our water. How much water do you think we use for one fab in one day?
I'm not serious.
14 million gallons a day. Now we're going to end up recycling that. We'll start at a lower percentage, but still 2/3. And so water is not as much of an issue for Phoenix, but Phoenix,
And sand.
sand, that's an issue, because that's the wafer input up front to build the actual wafer itself, but. So when you start thinking about it, it eliminates a lot of places in the country. And we start moving, and I use that phrase, Patty, good listening skills, capital efficiency. If there's other parts of the supply chain, chemical players, and equipment players already in a location, you think, yes or no, that would have that a cost advantage would appreciate to us?
Yeah.
Right. But you could work with TSMC. So it's lots of factors like that, and it became pretty clear. Jonathan Lee, who runs corporate strategy, I'm very close to, he's a very, very senior individual, and he was on the trip, a small group of us, so we didn't necessarily talk about it. So I won't provide too much color commentary, but I persuaded him that Phoenix was a good place to end up, and that's where we ended up.
It's general.
Sorry, thank you for your time today. I wanted to go back to your comment on following out. And I understand maybe in actuality, there's a hollowed out perception is reality. Right?
Well, good point.
So within Taiwan, I was there in December, and there is public sentiment concerns that TSMC is shifting to the US externally. And that can shift political winds internal to Taiwan as well, which could push them secondary order effects in order to China ideologically. So from a business perspective too, that impacts the retention and everything. So there are business impacts sociologically as well. So I'm just concerned from the US interest perspective.
Okay, so you're the only other person wearing a tie. So I'm here. What were you doing in Taiwan? What was your?
Yeah, so I'm a national security fellow here. I went and I worked on the Hill as well. So,
Who did you work for at the Hill?
so I was able to set up some very productive meetings.
Great. Who'd you work for on the Hill?
Senator Rounds.
Mike Brown. Yeah, it's good value. Yeah. I think you're raising useful points. We're an engineering company. And we can just measure the steps that we take to meet customer demand and interest, and then understand that Taiwan can't be our overwhelming sole location for fabrication. We're growing so fast that it's important for us to hire talent. We're going to hire 7,000 engineers this year. Dated. They may come from Kodai in Tokyo, or they may come from Columbia University in the US. But our footprint has to change. But Taiwan remains central to our operations. Now, what you're talking about, second, third order effects, is very difficult for us to make judgments about. We're a company. We're not the Taiwanese government. We're publicly
Semi-state sponsored. Semi.
No.
Quasi.
No.
You get a lot of support.
We're publicly traded, billions of shares of stock, and we answer to shareholders. Government has a 5% equity stake, but we answer to shareholders, and we have to run it like a business. The shareholders demand it. We have a board of directors. People look like everyone in this room, who keep our feet to the fire. And so I think you make interesting points. I mean, there's no perfect answer here. But as a company, we have to grow. We have to grow.
And if I may add to that, I was talking to Peter about this as well. Of course, politics is always interesting in Taiwan. And for a company like TSMC, that's so enormous and so important. But I remember 20 years ago, when the ruling party and the opposition parties are different, they flipped. And when TSMC actually was building factories in mainland China, it was exactly the same concern, hollowing out. But hollowing out not to the United States, but to mainland China, right? But TSMC does have the need, like you said, because you're growing and using all these different resources. So I thought that's an interesting perspective for you to sort of consider, right? Doesn't matter, I'm sure if TSMC expands to other countries, obviously China and the US are most political at this point, and so it gets most attention. But if you expand to Malaysia, Indonesia, or other countries, essentially people will still question, is it a hollowing out effect?
So that's well said. That's interesting when she told me that about, I had not thought about that. That China, like, this is all replicating itself, but these are the US versus China once upon a time. Yes. But I think you make interesting comments.
Yeah.
And we, as a company, we don't have, we try to make the best judgments about where we can make the best silicon, the best locations, and try to proceed best with it. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you. Just wondering because we need to work the concept of friendshoring. It's a difficult countries, especially in the northern part of Latin America. Something very niche, Costa Rica is in one of them.
So I used to work at Intel, and Intel has 1,500 people headcount in Costa Rica. Costa Rica's been a great experience for them. Mexico is making a pretty good big push on ATP, which is assembly, test, and packaging. And I haven't talked about that at all, but make this as simple as possible. We manufacture on the front end, the actual chip itself, putting 146 billion transistors on the die, on the chip. And we're the industry leader in that respect. But Moore's law is running into the laws of physics. Moore's law is about squishing transistors onto a silicon die at a 2x rate over 24 months. At some point, the laws of physics will trump Moore's law. So the innovation is going where? It's going to the back end, called assembly, test, and packaging, where you might you have system architecture, chiplets, lots of different types of chiplets on a die, but then a good example might be chip stacking. And this is this AMD chip I talked about. 2 chips are better than 1. And so past 30, 40 years, you've had 1 die, put 2 chips on top of each other, then you're going to get maybe 2x the dynamism, 2x the power, 2x the functionality. But then you've got to manage the heat envelope between the two. So Mexico, other countries on what we call the back end assembly, test, and packaging, that might be a build out space. And the administration very smartly, Secretary Raimondo and the chip program office have talked about building up a capability in the US on the back end. That has been interesting to watch because the back end is, think of it as just putting your fancy chip onto a substrate, onto a printed circuit board, and shipping it out. Well, the back end now is becoming much more important in the semiconductor ecosystem. So I think Mexico, Costa Rica, I think they have a good role. I'm not sure about other promising candidates outside of Mexico who've tried very, very hard to start building an advanced packaging ecosystem.
Last.
Oh, let's all three. We're doing 1, 2, 3. It'll be nice.
So thanks, Peter and Wenchi for this great talk and anyone for doing it. I hope it thanks. Peter, you mentioned that you guys work for as the shareholders. I happen to follow TSMC's stock for some time. And so that it went from a peak of $540 last year to a low of 60 and now to around 90. And I've also noticed that Berkshire Hathaway has bought in and out, so I was quite surprised from that, especially because of the important role that TSMC has in the entire global supply chain. I wanted to ask you whether it is the geopolitical and security considerations that are affecting your valuation or your operations.
So, it's just interesting that TSMC is one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world that are down to right about 500 billion. That's 8 in the world, and the most valuable company in the world that nobody knows anything about. And, it peaked at 140. I know where I bought it at, and I know today it's right around 92, 93. And these things matter. We're owned by shareholders. I think that trade at the Taiwan Stock Exchange. It's very important. We're run just like Apple or Google operated. We care a great deal about our top and bottom line and our growth margin. The issue with us is the expense, the capex. We made 77 billion. I said this earlier, 76, 77 billion on the top line. Our capex. How much do you think we spent on building fabs last year in 22?
That you expand in the United States.
It's $37 billion. We have, I can't even buy a pencil when I walk in the DC office. It all goes back into building fabs. And the leading edge, most advanced chips, it's so expensive. You make 77, you spend 37 to build new fabs. And that's great. That's a win-win for American workers and people that are going to be at that fab in Phoenix and in other places. But they're like the software, the AMDs and the NVIDIAs don't face that expense. They're, let's say this whole front row here is a bunch of software designers. They do not face that CapEx expense that we face. So that's why the CHIPS Act is geared towards TSMC and Intel and Samsung, because they're the ones that have to put the shovel into the wet. All right, fire. We'll do 2 more, then we'll finish that.
Thanks. I'm here. I'm grocery street here. I'm cutting seed summer. So they're on Semiconductor. So
Did you take notes? Did you even take notes?
My question is kind of about the center of discourse, and if you think the current level of like enthusiasm for semiconductor policy is going to be sustainable over the next, 5 years or how many years, or kind of fade away, and if you think TSMC would prefer less of a spotlight on semiconductors, or more, or is ambivalent?
We're ambivalent on the second part. I'll tell you one thing. On the first part of your question, it's a very good question. What's the Commerce Department? AIT? Yeah. That's neat. That's really neat. The CHIPS Act is a 5-year program, appropriation, 52 billion, 39 application, 11-12 for the National Semiconductor Technology Center. That's essentially self-contained money, and then there's an investment tax credit portion of 25% ITP that's spread over 4 years. I mentioned that this is a crown jewel industry. It's a computer chip, not a potato chip. It cares about potato chips. This country cares about computer chips. And so this is a start. When you're there in your Commerce Department role, then get your name and number, you go work for them permanently. They're going to be a resource for me. Get together. This will take decades. And I think they know that. You got to crawl before you walk before you run. We're crawling now to raise the flag again and our ability to make chips that are the most advanced. But if you just quit in 4 or 5 years, then haven't nurtured it and sustained it in the way that this country must do that. As a leader of the free world, as a leader of the community of nations, this capability must exist in the United States, according to Gina Raimondo. think that's an accurate way to describe it. So it'll take decades of investment. But so far so good. They're off to a pretty good start.
Chip War, the book by Chris. It actually really, the fascination of chips didn't start just more recent. It actually started after the second. So the US has always, focused on chip making, but it was more in the military defense context and continues to be, right? It's just more not out in the public. So it's not a fact that you can be fascinated for 10 years and
Yeah, you gotta hook up with him. I saw him in Finchu a few days ago. He was there, and he's just up the street here at Tufts. You gotta just do it loud. He'd be interested in catching you and chatting.
last question.
Thank you, Mr. Peter, and for this talk. I have a strategic question in terms of the future of Arizona and study a lot of economics here at MBA program. So I'm curious, are there any strategy in the future to lower the cost of the plant in Phoenix to be as low as Taiwan or other places, given the natural differences as labor and the power cost in different places? And there's another book present if we got time. We have ChatGPT frenzy here. Does TSMC kind of expects a larger spike of demand for chips in the future, given this hugely fantastic views about the future use of ChatGPT and large language models in the future? Are there any strategies for that?
Yeah, on the second question, answer is yes. Basically what's happening is there's a new digital era that is being ushered in right now. And I gave an example of OpenAI, ChatGPT 3 and 4, but across retail, across healthcare, in terms of telemedicine, there's massive changes in the tech space driven by HPC, high performance compute. Again, you can have as much software as you want, but you better have an engine, a semiconductor engine that can keep up. And that's the advanced silicon, and that's what we do well. That's what we do best. And we are unquestionably the strongest there within the industry. We're very supportive of others in other parts of state of the present and legacy silicon, future silicon, but it is absolutely crucial that high performance compute silicon would be made here for lots of different reasons, and we're very, very good at it. We do have a strategy for Phoenix. It's one step at a time in terms of policy. I'm not the CFO, but we'll get better. We'll get more cost efficient. The building of the fab has been expensive. We've been public about that in terms of cost of inputs like concrete and labor and things like that. So once we get running, we'll qualify wafers this summer. We'll be in a high volume manufacturing Q1 2024. Our offtake is set. We know who's going to take that capacity. We'll get better. We'll get faster. We'll get more efficient with TSMC. And it'll take time though. And it's extremely important that we succeed in Phoenix. And the company feels that, and I think you guys are pleased with that.
So with that, join me thanking me just